Imagine a vast, sun-scorched desert where the sand has been fused into sheets of emerald glass. This isn't something a simple campfire could do. It requires intense, searing heat, far beyond anything nature usually provides. Now, imagine finding this glass in the very places where ancient civilizations once thrived. Today, we're diving into the Sumerian texts and the legendary war of the Anunnaki. I promise you, by the end of this story, you'll never look at ancient myths the same way again. We're exploring accounts of technologies so powerful they could wipe entire civilizations off the map. We're taught that history is a straight line, moving from stone tools to space travel. But what if humanity reached its technological peak in the distant past? What if the gods of old were actually pilots and soldiers of a hyper-advanced race? Let's unravel the mystery. Do you think it's possible for ancient people to have simply imagined such complex technical details? I want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. I'd love to read them. To grasp the scale of this story, we have to travel back to ancient Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. Over 5,000 years ago, this land saw the birth of the mysterious Sumerian civilization. They left behind thousands of clay tablets etched with cuneiform script. These texts speak of beings known as the Anunnaki, a name that literally translates to those who descended from the heavens to the earth. According to alternative theories, the Anunnaki came from a distant world, the planet Nibiru. They were searching for resources, specifically gold, to repair the failing atmosphere of their home planet. But there was no unity among these powerful beings. Two brothers, Enlil and Enki, were locked in a constant power struggle for control over the earth. This rivalry eventually boiled over into open warfare. The Sumerians described the weapons used in these battles as divine magic. But if you look closer at the translations, you don't see magic at all. Instead, you find chillingly accurate descriptions of advanced, high-tech weaponry. Let's begin with one of the most enigmatic documents to ever survive the passage of time, the Epic of Erra. This ancient Sumerian text recounts a prehistoric conflict among the gods, a war that unleashed an arsenal far beyond human comprehension. And here's where it gets interesting. If we pull back the veil of mysticism and stop treating this as just another legend, we are left with a terrifyingly precise account of a tactical strike. The epic explicitly describes how the god Erra chose to deploy a weapon capable of obliterating entire cities in a heartbeat. The imagery is haunting. The text speaks of the heavens tearing open and the earth being buried under a shroud of scorching ash. Skeptics often argue that these descriptions are merely metaphors for a violent thunderstorm or a stray meteorite. But let's put that theory to rest right now. A thunderstorm doesn't leave behind vitrified melted stone. It doesn't cause survivors to wither away from strange, unexplained illnesses. The text is quite clear. This was the calculated use of a specific device, kept under lock and key within the arsenal of the gods. This wasn't a freak occurrence of nature. It was a deliberate military command. To truly grasp the scale of this ancient devastation, we need to look closer at what exactly was hidden inside those divine vaults. Ancient Sumerian chronicles contain chilling references to the so-called 7 weapons of terror. These artifacts were forged by the supreme god, Anu, and unleashed to crush any sign of rebellion on earth. The texts make it clear these were no ordinary swords or spears. They are described as sophisticated devices that emitted a blinding radiance and a lethal, scorching heat. Descriptions of their activation are particularly striking. The records state that when these weapons were deployed, a brilliant glow engulfed the heavens, and the earth shook to its very foundations. To a modern observer, this sounds hauntingly similar to the launch of an intercontinental missile or the activation of a high-powered energy weapon. Skeptics often argue that ancient people were simply terrified by volcanoes, attributing natural eruptions to the gods. However, there is one crucial detail that dismantles this theory. Mesopotamia is not a volcanic region. Furthermore, the Sumerians weren't describing fire rising from the ground. They spoke of flashes in the sky and beams of light striking down from above. These 7 weapons soared through the air, delivering total destruction wherever their operator directed them. But this raises a haunting question. Against whom was such a monstrously powerful arsenal actually deployed? According to deciphered ancient tablets, the primary target of this prehistoric war was the Anunnaki's spaceport. Many researchers place this site on the Sinai Peninsula. Ancient records suggest the gods chose to destroy the facility to prevent it from falling into the hands of Marduk's rival faction. Think about the gravity of that choice. They were willing to wipe their own most vital transport hub off the face of the earth. Physical evidence of this event can still be seen today in the vast fields of vitrified sand scattered across the Sinai. These fragments of green glass only form when temperatures exceed thousands of degrees. The old theory that these were caused by lightning strikes has long been debunked. Lightning creates thin glass tubes called fulgurites. But here, we find entire plains of sand fused into solid glass. The Sumerian lament for Uruk describes a blinding flash that stole people's sight, followed immediately by a terrifying wall of fire. It is a description that is chillingly similar to modern accounts of nuclear or high-yield vacuum weapon strikes. The gods succeeded in destroying their spaceport, but the catastrophic fallout of that strike spared no one. Following the destruction of the spaceport, ancient records began to describe a phenomenon even more terrifying than the explosion itself. They called it the evil wind. This wasn't a storm that toppled trees or leveled houses. Instead, it brought an invisible death. The texts recount how this wind shrouded the cities of Sumer, leaving people to drop dead right where they stood. The Lament for Ur provides a chilling account. It describes in detail how the wind caused skin to erupt in sores, how victims coughed up blood, and how the rivers turned bitter and toxic. Doesn't that sound like a textbook description of radiation sickness and radioactive fallout? Some skeptics argue that the Sumerians were simply witnessing an outbreak of plague or cholera. But the plague doesn't poison entire river systems overnight, nor is it accompanied by an eerie, unnatural glow in the sky. The evil wind was described as an invisible shroud drifting through the air, extinguishing all life in its path. Most tellingly, the texts mention that the gods themselves fled their cities in a state of panic to escape it. If this were merely an earthly disease, why would powerful beings with such advanced technology be so terrified? They weren't running from a virus. They were fleeing radiation. Now, let's take a look at the personal weaponry of the gods. One of the most legendary artifacts was wielded by the god of war, Ninurta. His weapon was known as Sharur, which literally translates to the smasher of thousands. In ancient texts, Sharur is described as something truly extraordinary. This wasn't just a simple mace or a battle axe. Sharur was capable of independent flight, could gather intelligence across the battlefield, and, most remarkably, could actually communicate with Ninurta. A perfect example is the myth of the Anzu bird, where Sharur acts as a high-tech scout. It soars over the mountains, tracks the enemy's movements, and relays that data back to Ninurta. While mainstream scholars might dismiss this as a mere fairy tale about a magic weapon, let's be realistic. The description of a flying object that performs reconnaissance and features a voice-activated interface is a perfect match for modern military drones. Sharur could rain down fire and toxins from a bird's-eye view, while Ninurta remained at a safe distance, simply issuing commands. This suggests a staggering level of automation within the Anunnaki military. It appears they were deploying advanced drone technology thousands of years before the modern era. This raises a logical question. Why would the Anunnaki need such a massive arsenal here on Earth? The answer can be found in an ancient text known as the Epic of Erra. You see, before humanity ever existed, all the heavy labor on our planet was performed by lesser gods known as the Igigi. They were the ones mining gold and building cities. But eventually, the Igigi grew tired of their life of servitude and staged a massive rebellion. They burned their tools and marched on the palace of the supreme god Enlil, surrounding his residence. To crush this global uprising, the ruling elite needed powerful weapons of control and intimidation. For example, the texts describe Enlil threatening to unleash arrows from heaven just to pacify the mob. There's a popular myth that these gods were peaceful mentors to humanity. But in reality, the Sumerian archives reveal a harsh, militarized society with a rigid hierarchy. While the Igigi rebellion was eventually suppressed, it became the sole reason the gods decided to create a race of submissive servants. According to the texts, that is how the first humans came to be. And today, we have inherited their world, a world that remains filled with deadly weapons. Ancient records contain accounts of a terrifying weapon the Sumerians called the Eye of Death, or the Shining Beam. These devices were often mounted atop the towers of sacred temples. According to the texts, this beam could slice through solid stone from a distance and reduce enemies to ash. A prime example is the account of the god Nergal using such a weapon to destroy a hostile city. The fortress walls didn't just crumble, they melted like wax in the sun. Historians often dismiss these descriptions as poetic metaphors or symbols of divine wrath. But let's look at it logically. If you were living in the Bronze Age and you witnessed a high-powered industrial laser or a plasma cutter in action, how would you describe it? You wouldn't have words like laser or plasma in your vocabulary. You would call it a shining beam or a burning eye. Intriguingly, the ruins of certain ancient fortresses in the Middle East show evidence of exposure to extreme thermal power. The stone blocks are vitrified on the outside, yet perfectly intact on the inside. A standard fire simply cannot produce that kind of intense, focused heat. In the ancient world, weapons of mass destruction weren't limited to things that explode. Sumerian texts describe something much more sophisticated, climate warfare. The most staggering example is the Great Flood. We usually think of it as a natural disaster or an act of divine wrath. But the Epic of Gilgamesh tells a different story. It explicitly states that the flood was artificially triggered by the god Enlil, who decided to reset the planet because humanity had become too noisy. The texts describe the gods opening celestial floodgates and unleashing an unnatural, violent storm. While some believe the myth stems from local rivers overflowing, the cuneiform tablets point to technological intervention. They describe gods flying through the atmosphere and launching objects into the clouds, which was followed by the fall of a mysterious black rain. This sounds remarkably like a global version of modern cloud seeding. Using the weather as a weapon is a concept we are only just beginning to explore, but it seems the Anunnaki mastered it long ago, using the very elements as a tool for a global purge. Speaking of legendary weaponry, we have to look back at the epic showdown involving the Babylonian god Marduk. The ancient text Enuma Elish recounts his struggle against the primordial monster, Tiamat. To face her, Marduk wielded a weapon known as the Mhulu. While the name translates to the evil wind, this was clearly no ordinary gust of air. The scriptures describe Marduk firing this wind into the creature's belly, literally tearing her apart from the inside out. Think of it in terms of modern acoustic weaponry or high-intensity infrasonic generators. A concentrated sonic blast of that magnitude is capable of liquefying internal organs and shattering stone. The simplistic interpretation that Marduk just blew really hard is frankly naive. The description points to something far more sophisticated, a directed kinetic or acoustic pulse. Marduk used this device in tandem with a specialized containment net to immobilize his target before delivering the final blow. This kind of tactical synergy is staggering. We aren't looking at a primitive sword fight, but a detailed account of a highly advanced combat system in action. Speaking of nets, containment weaponry also held a prominent place in the arsenal of the gods. Ancient texts frequently mention the net of Anu, a device capable of blanketing entire armies and rendering them completely helpless. The epics describe it descending from the heavens, leaving anyone caught beneath it unable to move a muscle, as if frozen in place. One account illustrates this during the suppression of a rebellion. The insurgents were simply enveloped in an invisible veil and collapsed to the ground. We could easily dismiss this as a magical fishing net, but let's look past that trope. A standard rope net couldn't possibly immobilize an entire army over a vast area without any visible physical restraints. What the Sumerians are actually describing sounds remarkably like a localized electromagnetic field or a directed energy weapon that targets the nervous system. Paralyzing radiation, deployed from an aircraft. This is exactly how a modern observer would describe high-tech, non-lethal weaponry designed for crowd control. Beyond their mastery over energy and climate, the Anunnaki texts describe the use of biological warfare. When humanity grew too numerous or rebellious, the gods didn't always resort to brute force. Instead, they deployed invisible killers. In the Epic of Erra, the god Enlil orders the release of plague, fever, and disease, framed not as a divine curse, but as a calculated military operation. This is evidenced by the fact that Enki, the god of medicine, had to develop secret antidotes and pass them to a chosen few to ensure the survival of the species. While many believe the ancients were simply personifying natural illnesses, the texts contain chillingly specific details. These outbreaks occurred suddenly, immediately after divine chariots passed over the cities. They struck within a clearly defined radius and vanished as soon as Enlil gave the order to stand down. This sounds remarkably like the aerial dispersal of biological agents followed by targeted decontamination. Aggressive biological impact was simply another tool in the arsenal of these beings. All these weapons needed a way to reach their targets. Sumerian tablets are filled with descriptions of flying vehicles known as the Shem or the Mu. While traditional translations often interpret these words as name or renown, researchers like Zechariah Sitchin have argued that the context demands a different meaning, a flying machine. According to the texts, the gods ascended into the heavens in these Mu, trailing fire behind them. A perfect example is the story of King Etana, who was taken into the sky by the gods. He described the earth shrinking into a tiny mound and the vast sea looking no larger than a breadbasket, a clear account of the view from an immense altitude. There is a persistent theory that ancient people simply imagined fiery chariots by looking at birds or clouds. But birds do not leave jet trails of fire, nor do they produce a deafening roar that makes the earth tremble. These crafts served as platforms for the weapons of terror, allowing the Anunnaki to wage aerial combat and maintain total air superiority over Mesopotamia and the rest of the planet. One of the most captivating chapters of ancient history is the saga known as the Pyramid Wars. According to alternative translations, the Great Pyramid of Giza wasn't built as a tomb, but as a massive navigational beacon and a defensive stronghold for the Anunnaki. Ancient texts describe a brutal conflict where a rival faction of gods seized the complex. The accounts of the assault are staggering, detailing how attackers shattered defensive energy shields using resonance-based weaponry. Once inside, the victors completely gutted the facility, stripping away pulsating crystals and destroying the control mechanisms. While mainstream historians often dismiss this as pseudo-scientific fiction, claiming the pyramids are merely piles of stone, several questions remain. Why are there no inscriptions inside the Great Pyramid other than basic technical marks? And why do its inner chambers so closely resemble industrial resonance cavities? Sumerian texts suggest the pyramid was actually a sophisticated dual-purpose machine, a global communications hub, and a potential weapon of immense power. Deciphering these ancient texts is a constant struggle. Sumerian is a remarkably complex language full of terms that have no direct modern counterparts. Because of this, mainstream scholars often dismiss technical descriptions as mere religious metaphors. For instance, when a text says, "A god hurled a lightning bolt from the heavens," an academic sees it as a display of divine wrath. But if we look at it through a technical lens, the meaning changes entirely. A perfect example is the term me. In the texts, the me are described as small, physical objects that store the gods' power and knowledge. These weren't abstract ideas. The gods actually wore them, lost them, and stole them from one another. Whoever controlled the me controlled the technology. Traditional science views this as a myth about divine essence. But the descriptions align perfectly with things like portable hard drives, microchips, or encrypted access keys. These were tangible objects containing data and software. Without the right perspective, we've spent years reading high-tech manuals as if they were nothing more than ancient fairy tales. Evidence of such weaponry isn't just found in ancient clay tablets. It is etched into the very stones of our planet. Take, for example, the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley. Although it lies outside Mesopotamia, the legends of these regions are deeply intertwined. Excavations reveal that this once thriving metropolis met a sudden, violent end. At the epicenter of the destruction, the ground was vitrified, melted into glass, while skeletons found scattered in the streets showed radiation levels dozens of times higher than normal. These people were simply going about their daily lives when catastrophe struck. Some suggest the city was lost to a flood or a sudden plague, but a flood doesn't melt brick, and an epidemic doesn't leave a radioactive footprint. The devastation at Mohenjo-Daro is a mirror image of the aftermath at Hiroshima. A massive airburst occurred, unleashing a colossal thermal blast and shock wave. This is physical proof that the weapons of terror described in Sumerian texts were not mere myths. They were reality, deployed with devastating force across the ancient world. Similar anomalies can be found all over the world. In Scotland, Ireland, and France, there are dozens of what are known as vitrified forts. These ancient stone ruins show evidence of such extreme heat that the rock itself melted, fusing into a single glassy monolith. Scientists have attempted to recreate this effect using traditional wood fires, but without success. A standard fire simply cannot reach the temperatures required to melt granite. Look at Dunmacneachan in Scotland. Here, massive blocks of stone have been liquefied into a glass-like mass. This wasn't the result of an accidental fire, and the theory that ancient Celts intentionally melted stone to strengthen their walls defies the laws of physics. To pull that off, they would have needed modern industrial furnaces the size of a mountain. Instead, everything points to something far more advanced. These fortresses appear to have been the targets of orbital or aerial strikes, high-energy plasma or laser weapons. These are the same devastating forces described in ancient legends as the weapons of the Anunnaki, stories of which can be found across the entire planet. In the art of war, defense is just as critical as offense. Ancient Sumerian records describe a unique form of protection used by the Anunnaki called Melamu. Roughly translated, it means a terrifying radiance or a blinding aura. The texts depict Melamu as a glowing field that surrounded these beings, making them completely immune to mortal weapons like arrows and spears. Consider the accounts of a god entering battle. His Melamu was so brilliant that his enemies were blinded and collapsed in terror, unable to even look in his direction. Many assume this is merely a poetic way to describe golden armor or a spiritual halo, similar to those seen in religious icons. But that is a common misconception. The original text specifically detailed the physical impact of this glow. It physically repelled incoming objects and scorched anyone who dared to get too close. This is a strikingly accurate description of a portable force field or a plasma shield. It suggests the Anunnaki wore advanced technological armor, powered by compact energy sources, creating an impenetrable cocoon of energy around them. Ancient Sumerian chronicles reveal another incredible episode, the story of how the creature known as Zu stole the tablets of destinies from the supreme god, Enlil. These tablets were far more than just religious relics. They were the ultimate command and control system for the gods' communication and weaponry. The records state that once Zu seized them, all communication was severed, and the celestial craft stopped responding to commands. To put this into a modern context, imagine someone stealing the nuclear launch codes while simultaneously crashing the Pentagon's servers. The result was a total paralysis of their entire military infrastructure. The traditional belief that these were simply magical clay tablets doesn't hold up. If they were just pieces of clay, Enlil could have easily replaced them. Instead, their loss triggered a global panic, leading to a high-speed pursuit involving heavy weaponry. This suggests the tablets of destinies were actually sophisticated technology, either cryptographic keys or the central server governing the entire Anunnaki network on Earth. Yet, not all destruction was forged in fire and radiation. Enki, the lord of the oceans and waters, chose a far more subtle approach. Ancient accounts describe his ability to reroute rivers and trigger devastating tsunamis, washing away entire armies in a single stroke. To Enki, engineering and fluid dynamics were not just sciences, they were weapons of war. One particularly striking story tells of how he diverted subterranean currents to flood the hidden underground bunkers of his enemies. In his hands, water became a blade. Historians often claim that ancient people simply mistook natural floods for the will of a god. But the texts describe something much more deliberate. They speak of specialized devices lowered into the depths, forcing the water into unnatural, violent motion. This sounds less like a miracle and more like the work of powerful wave generators or directional hydraulic rams. Ultimately, the Anunnaki arsenal left no element untouched. Earth, air, fire, and water all were mastered through their superior technology and unleashed upon the world. The aftermath of this cataclysmic war is recorded in the most somber of Sumerian texts. The Anunnaki realized too late that they had nearly destroyed the very world they were fighting to possess. The evil wind, a radioactive blight, had scorched the land, leaving vast regions uninhabitable. It was then that the gods made the final decision to abandon Earth. The tablets describe them boarding their celestial ships, looking down in sorrow at the burning ruins of the cities below. There are passages where even the gods weep, finally grasping the horrific cost of their own weapons. They realized they had gone too far. Conventional history suggests the gods simply lost interest or faded into the metaphors of newer religions. But the Sumerian records tell a much more literal story, one of a mass physical evacuation. They were fleeing a zone of radioactive fallout. The weapons that remained were either taken with them or buried deep underground. This concept of mutually assured destruction wasn't born in the Cold War. It was realized on this planet thousands of years ago. The Anunnaki left us with a scarred world and a primal fear of fire from the heavens, a trauma that remains etched in our genetic memory to this day. And that brings us to the most staggering conclusion of this entire journey. The weapons described in Sumerian texts aren't just the work of primitive imagination. We are looking at detailed accounts of technology, capable of wiping out entire continents. But here is the most chilling part. Some researchers believe that a portion of this arsenal remains hidden to this day, buried deep within the ancient subterranean vaults of the Middle East. It's possible that the hunt for this Anunnaki legacy is what truly drives the hidden geopolitics of our modern age. We live in constant fear of a nuclear world, never realizing that our planet may have already survived a similar apocalypse in the distant past. The Sumerian tablets aren't just myths or bedtime stories. They are a warning echoed from across the millennia. Thank you for watching until the very end. If this theory gave you pause, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button so you don't miss our next investigation. And now, I have a question for you. Do you believe it's possible that ancient civilizations wiped themselves out using technologies we've long since forgotten? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.